Mike Katchen, my goodness, I remember hearing you speak at the Atlanta Venture Forum in Halifax 6 years ago, uh, talking about this idea that now is a unicorn, Wealthsimple. Uh, Mike, you've got to be delivering some really differentiated value to your customers, and I'd like you just to give me a bit of an overview as to what that value, what you're doing that has attracted so many users and tremendous investment.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. It's great to see you again and chat. Um, you know, we're really passionate about our mission, which is about making really high quality financial services simple and accessible to everybody. And we've been at this for 6 years, and I think have been fortunate that over that time we've expanded the scope of what we do from long-term investing to helping people that want to manage and trade their own securities to getting into everyday banking replacements and filing your taxes. And we try to take what are these really overwhelming moments for people that carry a lot of consequence. Making good financial decisions is really such an important part of how people live the lives they want, provide the lives they want for their families, and make them feel simple, approachable, transparent, and empower people to make better decisions and ultimately achieve better outcomes as a result of that.
There's got to be a need, we because the users have been attracted. But I started off in the investment industry in 1979, and you look at how things have proceeded in terms of transparency over the years. First, it was around just commission structures and a number of different activities like that, but it never really opening up and simplifying the decision making on a very personal level. And that's really the most important thing, isn't it? Because everybody's individual situation is very different, and not everybody will qualify by any means to have a quote unquote wealth advisor or investment advisor. And so just help me through the specific sorts of decisions when somebody's onboarding with you. How's the experience different?
Well, I think you raised a really important point, which is, historically, one of the biggest problems of the industry has been access. You needed a lot of money to get access to any sort of financial advice that was objective and would help you get where you needed to go. And the reality is, a lot of people that don't have those kinds of assets yet are some of the folks in the most need of advice and support.
Absolutely.
And I think the beauty of technology is it changes the business model of delivering investment advice, and that makes it more accessible. And so historically, the only way you could get investment advice was to meet an advisor face to face. And so if you're going to take real time from an advisor, they're going to come meet you in person. You have to have a sufficient business model for that, to make sense. But if you can do it through digital channels, that changes. And in fact, if you can walk someone through a guided questionnaire that asks them about their investment goals, their experience with investing, their risk tolerance, you start to be able to build a picture of what kind of portfolio would make sense for this client. And in the vast majority of cases, that's all people need. And in fact, for young people, that's all they want. They don't want to make time to come meet an investment advisor face to face in downtown, Toronto or Vancouver or wherever, you might be. They want to do it in a really simple way on their phone. And we, after, onboarding now hundreds of thousands of Canadians over the last few years, have been able to refine that questionnaire to really pull out the most important elements of what goes into building a financial plan and an investment plan for a client, and make it as simple and frictionless as possible.
And that's so important from my experience. It's not what specific investment you make, but your strategic priorities that are just so crucial. Making the right
That's,
big choices.
that's it.
Uh, yeah,
That's the big mistake people make when they think about investing is they think that successful investing is about picking the winners.
yeah.
And the reality is, it's behaviors that trump performance when it comes to capturing long-term outcomes. And so this has been our focus from the start, which is don't focus on the portfolio and the investment selection and what funds someone might be in. None of that matters in the context of, can you help someone get a plan, start contributing regularly to that plan, stay disciplined through market ups and downs? Because if you can do that well, they're going to have a wonderful financial outcome in the long term.
Yeah, for me, it's so crucial to make sure that Canadians each have access to that information. And if you have a major physical barrier to getting access to that information in a way that's relevant in your life, you're never going to change the behaviors that are going to empower you to move out of the situation that you're currently in towards the one you want to be in.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the things that's also a challenge of the industry is the incentives have been backwards, where because most of the industry sells financial products through advisors, it makes sense to make the information feel overwhelming and complex so that you need someone to hold your hand and walk you through this process, or to feel like you need that. But the reality is it's not that complicated. And you can build content and hand holding that speaks human language and simplifies these concepts and helps empower people to make better choices. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've seen such success. Is it's a welcome, a refreshing new approach to this industry that people just have never seen before.
Well, and I think the really important thing for me is it doesn't displace the wealth advisory services that are out there.
Not at all. It complements it.
Absolutely.
It's a real
Yeah.
role for advice. It's real value. And for a lot of people, it's exactly what they need.
Yeah.
Uh, and
And, and I think that's one of the things that is often missed in this discussion about consumer directed finance is it's like an either or, and it's an assumption that what we have is perfect for everybody because it's perfect for some. And if we're going to build an inclusive society where people all have access to financial independence as best as we can possibly do it, empowering the private sector to fulfill that, the requirements of making that happen is pretty crucial. So let's talk about the regulatory environment that we're now in. That the great news is since the last time we spoke, the finance minister has restarted the consumer directed finance consultations, and they're ongoing as we speak. Big changes are likely ahead of us. We've had Bill C-11 tabled in the House of Commons, which starts to give Canadians, if it comes into law, it gives Canadians the right to determine who uses their data for what purposes, which is crucial in this sector. So speak a little bit about some of the challenges you've been experiencing as a business in providing optimal services to your customers, your users. We can only take a few minutes, Mike.
yeah, I mean, so I was just trying to figure out where to start. Listen, I think we're fortunate that we have a very strong relationship with our regulators here in Canada, and we operate in other markets, and I think that the regulatory regime here is quite strong, and the approach of the regulators is quite collaborative at trying to understand where the future of the industry is going. So I do give folks a lot of credit for the approach here. I'd say where the biggest challenge we face is that the market and technology are moving so fast that it is extremely hard for the regulatory rules and the frameworks to keep pace.
Absolutely. Very, very important point. Yep.
And so what our biggest challenge is when we come into conflict with rules that may have made sense in a different regime. And an example, just to make that clear, when we launched the business, the only way you were allowed in Canada to open up an investment advice account was to meet an advisor face to face. And it took us a year of working with the regulators, showing data about how young people were never going to meet financial advisors face to face. And you didn't need to meet financial advisors face to face to be placed in a suitable portfolio. And effectively, by having this rule, what the unintended consequence was that young people were not going to get investment advice. And that's not a solution that anyone wanted, but the rules were such that that was the reality on the ground. And it took a long time to work through those rules. to enable what is a great solution for Canadians. And there are lots of examples like that, where I think the biggest challenge is how do we move from a rules-based regulatory environment to a principles-based regulatory environment that enables flexibility of interpretation in this fast-moving environment that we're in. Because otherwise, once we write a new rule, or if our approach is to write these new rules to try to manage cryptocurrencies, as an example, or to try to manage kind of these digital, financial technology companies that are growing so quickly, by the time we write it, they'll be out of date. And so it's not going to be the right approach going forward. And I would encourage our regulators to have that principle-based thinking rather than rules-based thinking.
I think that's such an important point, because the reality is business models and technology are both evolving very, very rapidly. And for me, the best example is that fax machines are still used in healthcare and finance in Canada on a regular basis. And it's really great
Say
for the
no more.
fax. Go ahead.
Say no more.
Yeah.
Enough, right?
It's great for the facsimile producers because there's probably no other country on earth that's still acquiring them. But other than that, it's craziness. So that's a really important piece of advice.
Yeah.
So, as we move forward and you start to look at the global opportunity for a group like Wealthsimple, what can be done in Canada? Because I'm a real believer that if we get really good privacy legislation that Canadian-based companies adhere to, that there's a great global opportunity, that people who deal with a Canadian company can have a sense of trust in how we do things in this country. The rules we adhere to, the values that inspire our businesses, creates a great global opportunity that I'd like to see us pursuing. But what are your thoughts in that regard? Because you're clearly at that point.
I mean, I think that you raise an important one, and I would encourage us as a country to be more ambitious in our global kind of thinking, and to pick the spots where we do think we can be global leaders. I think it was a wasted opportunity in the wake of the 2008 crisis, where the Canadian banks came out as perceived as these global leaders, to further enhance our global position, and expand, using that trust that was around the Canadian financial system at the time. And perhaps privacy is kind of the next frontier. Crypto is an interesting one. We recently received a license as the first and only regulated crypto platform in Canada, perhaps North America, perhaps the world. I don't actually know that for sure, but where are these emerging trends that are important for consumers? And how can we set Canadian companies up for success, not only here, but abroad? I think is a really interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah, that for me, we've got to, because we're going to have to replace different industries over time. It's what happens as economies evolve. But the reality is we've never digitized as fast as we're digitizing today. This is a saying that's out there, and I believe it to be true.
Yeah.
And we're never going to digitize this slow again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well,
so
I hope that is true. You hope that we use the momentum. There's a lot of silver linings in this awful pandemic. There's so much that's awful about it, but there are silver linings, especially when it comes to innovation. The ability to bring these new vaccines to market so quickly, the digitization of government and industry, and the pace at which it's moving. And we need to carry that forward and not snap back, especially in fields like healthcare, where there has been kind of 10, 20 years of innovation in terms of the use of digital technologies in just the last several months. And I couldn't agree with you more that I think that we are at this inflection point as a country where, historically, we talked about this the last time we were on the phone call, and that we do two things, right? We pull things out of the ground and we finance that activity. And that's basically the story of the Canadian economy. And that's worked really well for us for a long time. But if you look forward, you start to get nervous about, is that going to be enough to sustain the level of prosperity that we Canadians come to value and appreciate? And the answer is no. And we have a absolute requirement, necessity to introduce innovation and the innovation sector as a much bigger part of the pie in our economy here. And that's a necessity to do it now because it's going to pay dividends for decades to come. But if we miss the boat, we're going to be in real trouble.
And even if you don't believe that there is a diminishing of some sectors in relative terms globally from, or relative terms within Canada, why wouldn't we? Because this is an opportunity sitting in front of us, that how we choose to regulate ourselves and the markets we choose to go after and where we put our priorities can create tremendous opportunity. In 6 years, you've created a billion-dollar enterprise that was from an idea. It's based on an idea. And that to me it just says it all, that if we can really harness that Canadian ingenuity, and I look at the fact that Canada is a global leader in AI, but we haven't diligently gone after every single sector and said, how do we create regulatory change? How do we create opportunities for Canadians and for the world by applying AI in this sector in a determined and systematic way? And there's signs right now that we're going to change that, thanks to the open banking or the consumer directed finance consultations restarting. But let's use it as a model. Let's not use it as a single point where we're making some changes. Let's use it as a model for the types of change, as you say, in healthcare and other sectors.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And to be targeted, we can't be the best in the world at everything. And it's not a very Canadian thing to say, let's pick our spots and win. But that's absolutely what we need to do.
Own the podium.
Yeah, exactly. It's we like winning. We've done it before, and it felt really good when we owned the podium. In the Vancouver Olympics, and we ought to do it again with key sectors.
And expect it as a regular result. Let's just challenge ourselves to be unrelenting. So, Mike, as we go to wrap up, I just want you to look forward 10 years, and from that point, look back to what decisions we made today that have made you feel really proud, as of Canada, that Canada made some right choices at that key point, that the trauma of COVID catalyzed some really important decisions. And what were those decisions in your mind?
It's a great question. The ones that come to mind are a fewfold. That we've made some major investments that set us up for success over the coming 10 and 20 years. And where are the spaces that I think that we have real, major opportunity? Immigration. I was really, proud of the government's plan to continue increasing immigration targets over the years ahead. And I think continuing to be a leader and attracting the world's best and brightest to come to Canada, to build companies, to contribute to our innovation sector is going to be a long-term source of advantage that we cannot lose sight of.
And we've got to make sure we empower them to succeed.
And now is a time when Canada looks like such an attractive place to be. We must use this point in time and our status in the world to do that now. So that's one. Two is to your comment, around some of the leaps forward. In Canada, we have this wonderful universal healthcare program. We ought to figure out how the heck to turn it into an advantage. How do we not just rest on, we have this wonderful program that is costs are rising like crazy, it's going to become unaffordable, but we use this point in time, the digitization that we started to see, to actually take the needed and perhaps difficult steps now to fix it and create innovative opportunities and commercial opportunities that we can export, to the world, because we have this single funder, and we're all funders as taxpayers. We all should be incentivized to kind of play a role in doing that. It's a tall order, but I think important. Yep. And how do we continue to support the innovation sector? And I think that's how do we create the conditions for the entrepreneurs to want to start businesses here? And I think the tax code is an important part of that, for raising capital. In both foreign and domestic kind of venture capital to continue to support the ecosystem. And one, less obvious idea that I believe I've mentioned to you in the past is the key ingredient for our long-term success in the innovation economy is human capital. It's the people. And so I mentioned immigration, but I would love to see us set up so that every Canadian child has access to the best education opportunities possible, which is the key long-term ingredient to our prosperity and success. And one of the things we've recently done in our company is we've launched a foundation to help get the Canada Learning Bond in the hands of every child who qualifies for it, because there are 2 million Canadian children who qualify for free money towards their long-term education that are not claiming it today. And if we just fix that problem, I would feel a lot more excited and confident about our ability to compete long-term in the innovation sector globally with this educated, funded and educated kind of workforce coming into the market in 10 and 20 years. And we have the money there, we have the programs there. We ought to figure out how to get them in the hands of every kid that is eligible.
Again, it's the democratizing of an existing opportunity, democratizing access, which is what Wealthsimple has done in the wealth space, what we've got to spread across into so many other sectors. Mike, I just got to say thank you. You really genuinely inspire me every time I get a chance to chat with you, and I'm really grateful for that. And keep going and keep challenging us, because the investment that you're asking to be going into the innovation sector, I think, is not just government supporting investment from the private sector, or government investment in the private sector through tax credits, but it's government investment in regulatory evolution to make sure that we are not laggards, but we're really starting to dominate in certain sectors globally. So I've heard you loud and clear, and I'm grateful for the advice.
Well, thank you for your time, and lean on us. You have a community of people that care deeply about the success of our country and our sector, and we're here to be helpful. So thank you for listening and hearing us out.
Take it easy, Mike.
Take care.